With Chapter 5's hype train officially beginning, there are plenty of things that people are excited for, and I'd like to list out my personal predictions for what we'll see for Chapter 5. Today, we'll cover everything we know so far, and speculate on what I think would be cool to see for this chapter. Reminder, I am no video game analysis expert, I'm just a guy who likes to think outside the box. Alright, enough wasting time, let's get right into it, starting with... I know this one sounds kinda self-explanatory, but I've been hearing a lot of people say that Chapter 5 is not the last, and they're actually working on another chapter after this. I'm not convinced, sadly. The developers have been hyping this as the best chapter by far, which is a pretty bold statement. The main focus will most likely be the prototype, since he is the main antagonist of the entire game, and especially since he's all over the marketing so far. His hand holding the Poppy head as the poster for Chapter 5, and you see his shadow lurking in the background during the Chapter 5 teaser trailer. My final reason for thinking that this might be the final chapter is the game's setting. The labs, according to Leith Pierre, are the single most high security, high clearance section of the whole factory. And it's also home to the prototype. You are officially entering the prototype's territory. So yeah, it's hard for me to see how there can be another chapter after this. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there'll be another 6th chapter in development, but I don't think there'll be another chapter after this one. So I just want to give a quick update here since the first draft of this video was written long before the recent cinematic trailer of Chapter 5, which revealed some really interesting new characters and kind of gave me more ideas to add to my list. So I'll be sure to talk about them throughout whenever it's relevant. With this new trailer, people began speculating that this new character, Lily Lovebraids, will be this chapter's main antagonist. But I don't think that'll be the case. I still think it's the prototype, but I do think that she'll play a big role in the story. I'll talk about this more later, but just keep that in mind. This next one has people speculating the most. After defeating Doe, being blown up in the vents, and separated from her allies, we make our way to the labs and see the return of our favorite blue cuddly monster, Huggy Wuggy. Aside from the prototype, Huggy is perhaps the character that people are the most hyped for. And since he is the face of the franchise, it feels great to see him again, and hopefully he'll play a larger role in this chapter. From what we know, and by looking at this one screenshot of Huggy, they'll either have him be a constant threat and stalking you throughout the whole lab scenario, or they'll either have him appear in certain sections. Like after a certain puzzle or something, Huggy would just appear out of nowhere and start a full-on chase, like in Chapter 1. Whatever the case, I hope that Chapter 5 gives Huggy a well-deserved redemption arc. This trailer kinda surprised me with how much they showed, as well as how much they aren't showing. I love how they're still keeping the prototype a secret, but then they reveal a bunch of new faces, like these weird spiky plush toys, which look very similar to the smiling critters, but a little bit more punk rockish, as well as this new ominous character with a long moving braid. I actually didn't know this, but this character was actually leaked way before Chapter 5 was even teased, with one of the rumored character names being Lily Lovebraids. And since this character right here has a large braid, it's fair to say that that is Lily. I gotta give credit to Sheep Rampage because I actually didn't know that. My best bet is that these new characters will be given a pretty significant role in the game. Kinda like how Chapter 2 had the game station toys like Bunzo, PJ, and the Mini Huggies. Chapter 3 having Miss Delight, the Critters, and Dog Days. And Chapter 4 having Yarnaby and the Nightmare Critters. They could be like the secondary antagonists that you'll eventually have to fight later on. And they could have these unique areas that match their aesthetic, and also offer some unique challenges and interesting gameplay mechanics. For the game itself, I hope that they put the time into creating a decent amount of puzzles, and not overbloating it with long, drawn-out time wasters. Looking back at the previous chapters, like Chapter 3, it had a perfect atmosphere and truly scary moments, but the immense amount of puzzles really bogged down the experience, while Chapter 4's puzzles were more toned down. So I'm hoping that Chapter 5 will include more complex and creative puzzles than in Chapter 4, but hopefully not too overloaded with them like in 3. At the same time, I don't want this game to be a huge lore fest. While I love 4's story and characters, I would agree that a lot of 4's gameplay is just sitting around and waiting for characters' dialogue to finish. None of it is even tied into gameplay, so if you want to hear the whole story of 4, well, you better sit down and grab a snack. I hope this chapter strikes a perfect balance between both an intriguing story and engaging gameplay. This one is more of a personal opinion, but I think it'd be a cool idea to have the whole map of Chapter 5 be an interconnected world. From what Mob has shown us, the labs are going to be an interesting location filled with tons of secrets and lore bits to discover. But what I hope to see is that the labs will be interconnected, with little themed areas that link back to a central hub that you always return to, much like the Playcare orphanage in Chapter 3. These next ones on the list are a bit of a leap, but I think they'll be good additions. And besides, it's more fun to do it this way. I would love to see Boxy Boo make an appearance in Chapter 5. In order for this to make sense, I would imagine that after the Hour of Joy, Boxy was then taken in by the prototype for unknown reasons, and was moved somewhere into the labs, where you would meet him face to face. However they decide to introduce him, I hope they can create a small section with Boxy. It could be like a shorter, more structured version of Project Playtime, where you would have to hide and solve puzzles in order to leave. All the while, Boxy is hunting you down the whole time. Well, whether he'll appear as a slight Easter egg, or even a fully developed enemy, I would just want Mob to bring Boxy Boo back into the spotlight. And maybe, just maybe, give us a little tease about Project Playtime? Come on, man, that game has been collecting dust for a while now. From what I've heard from the leaks, there is a possible chance that a new smiling critter will make an appearance in Chapter 5. A lot might say that the new bigger body critter might be a nightmare critter, more specifically, Raby Baby, because if you look at the Fortnite collab game Poppy Playtime Escape Trials, you'll find hidden notes that contain lore bits, especially one mentioning an experiment called Project Raby Baby, which could be foreshadowing. But personally, I'm leaning more towards it being one of the original critters. The game stated that there were bigger bodies of all 8 smiling critters, and so far we've only been able to see 4, either in-game or in VHS tapes and documents. First being Catnap, who was the main villain of Chapter 3, and we also see him get killed off and taken by the prototype, so weirdly enough, he's not out of the question. Second being Dog Day, which we find in the Playhouse in Chapter 3. Some people say that he might come back since we haven't seen his death on screen, but judging by the fact that we've seen him get eaten from the inside and controlled by the mini critters, as well as a scream of anguish at the end of the chase, I'm just gonna assume that boy is long gone. Third is Hoppy Hopscotch, which we see in a VHS tape in Chapter 4, but later on we find out in a document that Hoppy tragically died somewhere, so he's off the list. And lastly was Bobby Bearhug, who was actually mentioned in a document that describes her bigger body experiment as being unable to move and was a complete failure. So that leaves only 4 critters left. And if you were to ask me, the one critter I can see returning would be Piggy Piggy. A lot of you might be asking, why? Let me explain. In Chapter 3, you have all these cardboard cutouts of the smiling critters, and just like every other cardboard cutout, they start by introducing themselves and explaining their quirks. But the more you press the button, the more disturbing it gets, usually ending with a loud scream of anguish. Aside from Catnap, obviously, isn't it strange how every other critter cutout ended with a scream or sounding terrified? All except for one. Now let's talk about her cutout specifically. Just have a listen to this and see what sticks out.
Hi there, I'm Piggy Piggy. Let's eat. Roast beef, delicious. Grilled chicken, down the hatch. Speared elephant, yum. Slayed unicorn, so hungry. Hey, what do you say you and I be friends?
Now, how crazy would it be if this was actually some foreshadowing for Piggy Piggy's appearance? Like we find out in chapter 5 that Piggy Piggy was actually locked up in some kind of cellar in the labs and was driven insane and forced to survive by cannibalizing the corpses of her own critter friends. Now, the actual chances of this happening are very, very slim, but I think it would be an interesting idea to see implemented. In the last chapter, after defeating Doey, we find out that the Ollie that we were talking to was actually the prototype all along, but we also learned that there was an Ollie a long time ago. Maybe in the next chapter they'll put in some lore behind who Ollie was, either in documents or in the game. Perhaps they could have a VHS tape that reveals what happened to Ollie. I would imagine the scenario being that the prototype actually found out where Ollie was hiding the whole time, and Ollie, scared knowing that they might die, recorded a little goodbye video to Poppy right before the prototype killed them. This would be such a heartbreaking moment to see, knowing that Ollie was some child turned experiment, and being Poppy's oldest friend long before the Hour of Joy. While we're on this topic, something else kinda clicked for me. In the Poppy Playtime Fortnite collab, the devs added a bunch of notes that reveal bits of lore, including one written by Poppy that describes a little sailor character. Now, this might sound far-fetched, but what if that little sailor was actually Ollie? We've never seen what Ollie actually looked like, so it could be a possibility. One piece of evidence that adds to this theory was after defeating the Doctor and returning to Safe Haven with the Omni Hand, we are then told that the prototype is outside, and the gang goes off to secure Safe Haven. I'll let this scene play out and listen to what Ollie says right here.
I'll try to gather the others. Keep them safe. Ollie, if you can hear me, work with our friend here.
Aye, aye, Captain.
You can do this.
Aye, Captain. When you hear that line, wouldn't you think that would sound something that a sailor would say? Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I wouldn't be shocked if this were some subtle foreshadowing about Ollie. From what we've been shown in the trailer, as well as how the events of the story have gone down so far, Chapter 5 will probably be the most emotionally intense chapter of them all. So emotional to the point that it leads me as well as many other people to believe that they might kill off one of the main characters. Because of how things went in the end of Chapter 4, a lot of fingers are pointing towards Kissy Missy not making it out alive. If by some chance they are planning to kill off Kissy, I would imagine that it would have to involve Huggy in some way. Like after being chased, we then come to a dead end and then we're cornered, when out of nowhere, Kissy at the last second stops Huggy, and then something dramatic would happen, like both of them falling off a cliff for example. Simply put, I'm predicting that Kissy Missy will unfortunately die by some form of sacrifice. While I still got my bets on Kissy Missy, this new trailer and this new image that came along with it has given me, as well as a lot of people, thinking that Poppy might not survive Chapter 5. We see that it takes place right after we get blown up with the events, and Poppy runs away from the prototype, only to fall and to be met and presumably captured by the newest character, Lily Lovebraids. And that seems to be the main goal of this chapter, to find our kidnapped Poppy. All this combined with the prototype's obsession with Poppy, as well as his search for this quote-unquote secret, leads me to believe that the prototype will be dissecting and experimenting on Poppy in order to learn the secrets of making toy life, kinda like what the scientists did to her way back when. But I think in this case, it'll possibly lead to the death of Poppy Playtime. Yep, Chapter 5 is looking like it's gonna be one hell of a ride. For this chapter, I hope we get a deeper exploration into the player's story, their background, and guilt that they have from their involvement with Playtime Co. Just like in Chapter 3's Hallucinations, there seems to be some sort of guilt clouding over PW, all because he was lucky not to go to work during the Hour of Joy. Maybe we get to visit PW's old office or something and learn a bit of lore about PW, what his involvement was in this whole experimentation on toys thing. They can even add a little tune that plays in the back, hinting at some sort of feeling of sorrow and regret. And finally, we would get to see some form of closure. That would be pretty interesting. One more thing. I know I said I put my money on Kissy Missy dying, but I'm also speculating that the player might also die by the end of the game. Maybe we do save the orphans, but then suddenly we get killed off by a random toy or something. I don't know what they plan on doing for the ending, but I could imagine that we might not be surviving the end of Chapter 5. This last prediction might be pretty dark, and I don't expect the game to go this route, but what if we find out at the very end of Chapter 5 that the orphans that we've been trying to save were actually dead this entire time? To give a brief summary, back in Chapter 3, we were introduced to the Playcare orphanage that was secretly used to test on children, some of them being test subjects for the Bigger Bodies initiative led by Dr. Harley Sawyer. But then in 1995, all hell would break loose, as the Hour of Joy, an event coordinated by the Prototype, began as the toys revolted and killed every employee and visitor in the factory. And then in Chapter 4, it was said by Poppy that the orphans were still alive but sleeping, and were actually taken and kept hostage by the Prototype for reasons we still don't know yet. I don't know, it's kind of hard for me to believe that the orphans are still alive somehow, considering that the Hour of Joy took place in 1995 and the actual game takes place 10 years later. My best bet is that they were either killed or even experimented on by the Prototype. But I would imagine them taking an even sadder route, and explaining how the orphans are actually dying of starvation after being held hostage for years. This would also explain why in one of the VHS tapes in Chapter 4, we see the Prototype lashing out at Dr. Sawyer saying that they're running out of time.
Your suggestions?
To produce the results I'm after. Have I made an error in allowing your survival? Of course not. We just need more time to perfect the time. Time is precisely what we do not have. Then I suggest you find some more. That will give me labs access. At least with the two of us.
That is out of the question.
You listen. Fine. But you have no staff, virtually no test subjects. It's hardly ideal conditions. Even when this place was fully operational, we were beating our heads against this. You can't expect to do it on your own so quickly. The situation necessitates it be done quickly. I'm just giving you the facts. And the fact is, we need more time, or this isn't going to work. I can only be reactive up here. Then of what use are you? You know I'm still your best shot at cracking that secret. If I weren't, you would have already killed me. A sound observation.
Yes.
You have made yourself useful. Provide me more options. I will try again. Of course.
But
You are stalling. Or worse. Remember,
your usefulness.
is the only reason you were not stripped for meat and spare parts.
For what other reason would the Prototype react like that? We know that the Prototype cares about the orphans and needs them for some particular reason, so that kind of leads me to believe that the orphans are dying and the Prototype is trying to figure out how to keep them alive. But damn, it would be so sad if we went through all of this hell, lost so many allies, only to find out that it was all in vain. Alright, looking back at this and the cinematic trailer, it's given me a new angle on what they could do with the orphans, which also lines up with my prediction about Poppy's fate. Because if the Prototype needs Poppy in order to figure out this so-called secret, it must have something to do with the creation of living toys. And since Poppy was the first successful experiment, it would make a lot more sense as to why he wants this damn doll. You know, aside from Poppy and the Prototype having a deeper connection that we don't 100% know about yet. And if it's true that the orphans are dying of starvation, maybe the prototype's plans are to turn the children into experiments like himself. Because you see, the unique thing about the prototype was that not only is he incredibly agile, smart, and dangerous, but unlike any other experiment, he doesn't need food in order to survive. I guess that's one way to keep the orphans alive. I hope that's not the case, but I am expecting some kind of twist at the end. Honestly, I just can't wait to see what they got cooking up for Chapter 5. And those are all my predictions. If you have anything that you'd like to see in Chapter 5, be sure to leave your comments down below and I'll be sure to check them out. If you like this video, please give it a huge thumbs up and why not subscribe as well. Thanks for watching and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.